and I am the moderator of this panel that we have here today. And looking at the abstracts, I'm definitely very interested and intrigued by what we're going to hear today. I think it's going to be a great session. And so the way this is going to work is there's going to be 3 presentations. We're still waiting on the 3rd presenter, but we should have 3 presentations of about 10 minutes each. And then after that, there's going to be a discussion with the presenters. And so I'm going to ask you all to write down any questions that you might have during the talk. So we're not going to have questions immediately after the talk, but all the way after all 3 presentations. But there will be plenty of time to ask questions. And these questions, of course, can be about what you heard, the content, but maybe also add questions about the process, doing the research, doing the writing, etc. And so please make sure that you write down those questions, and then we'll have a great discussion afterwards. So we're going to start with the first presenter of today, Clara Barsoum. She is a sophomore majoring in international affairs, international business, and minoring in Spanish. She was part of the Politics and Values program in her first year here on Laverne. She was born in Egypt, but calls northern New Jersey home. And she will be talking about Trapped in Limbo, how Lebanon's economic decline entrenches the marginalization of Palestinian refugees. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. I want to welcome you again to the UW Research Conference. And I want to encourage you all to take this as an opportunity to make the most of your UW writing and your experiences as a first year. So to start you off, I want to tell you a little bit about what I decided to make for when I was sitting in your seats. My UW class was Contested Bodies Beyond a Standard Refugee Narrative with Dr. Nabila Hijazi. Not sure if any of you are in it, highly recommend. But what I decided to choose was the story of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. So what I have in front of you is what life might look like if you are in Lebanon's Shatila camp, which is their biggest refugee camp, and how your story might look. So if you're one of these refugees, you have had refugee status, your population has had refugee status for longer than your grandparents, roughly 75 years, and the entire time your status has been narrated as a temporary one, and the laws governing you have operated as such. So you end up in a state that doesn't recognize you, but a homeland you're supposed to return to without an exact date on when that's going to happen, of course. So let me tell you a little bit more about why I chose to research this. So I think there's a few different unique angles to the story. In a class studying refugees, Palestine and Lebanon still stick out for a few reasons. Palestinians are a unique refugee group. They are one of the few stateless populations. They're dispersed across the region, and it is very important to the discussion of their identity that they are a temporary group and that their right of return be preserved. This is a contentious topic in Arab League discussions, and every country hosting Palestinians, this is a political hot topic of making sure that their temporary status is reiterated and that their right of return is preserved. Lebanon is also a unique host. It struggles with sectarian balance. We'll get into how that affects their government. They have a confessional parliament to try to appease this sectarian balance that they've been trying to uphold for decades. And we also have the catalyst of an economic crisis. Lebanon's economic crisis has been described as the worst one since the mid-19th century by the World Bank. And we'll get into what's so unique about it. Even more nuance, this temporary status means that there are Palestinian grandmothers today who've both never seen Palestine and also can't own a car in Lebanon, for example. So this leads me to my question of how has Lebanon's collapse deepened this legal and social marginalization of this Palestinian population in Lebanon? So to get to exigence, you'll have to do this in any paper you write. Tell me why I care. Tell me why this is so important to dedicate so many pages to. So there's a few reasons. Lebanon is #1 in refugees per capita. 1 in 5 people in Lebanon are a refugee. There's roughly 250,000 Palestinians in Lebanon, and almost all of them fall under the poverty line. They spent over 75 years in temporary status. We're unfortunately creeping up on a century of a temporary existence. And since 2019, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 90% of its value. So that's like your paycheck going from $1,000 to 50 bucks. And the UNRWA, supposed to be the external force that supplements these possible like state shortfallings for the refugee populations, is also struggling, constantly getting cuts, and its donors constantly questioning the funds that they're giving it. You can think of changing administrations moving towards isolationism or austerity cuts, and of course one of the first places they go is international aid. And so that means that some families are cut down to 1 meal a day in these highly dense, highly populated refugee camps like Shatila. And as I told you, this has been called by the World Bank, sorry, it's in the top 3 economic crises since the 1850s. Still quite devastating. So to tell you a little bit about my process and what your process might look like, I would encourage you to use like a multi-mixed media approach to your research. I've consulted academic and journalistic articles, so you can both get like an on-the-ground current events view and this academic temporal analysis of what the situation has been like. I also encourage you to look at primary sources. There were quite a few for this case. Property rights and labor codes. One that I specifically looked at was the Casablanca Agreement among the Arab League that discussed basically the refugee question as it relates to Palestinians and their rights to work, to live, to own property specifically. Also, you'll have a lot of NGOs and international organizations at your reach. Some that I consulted were, of course, the UNRWA, the NRC, Amnesty, Middle East Institute, etc. And this one is especially important. I would stress to you guys to look towards your professors and your mentors and the wealth of expertise and experience that you have all around you. So for example, if you're taking a bunch of IA classes and you want your UW paper to be about IA, that's an amazing opportunity to build a relationship with one of your professors and work that in. For me, I interviewed Dr. Bernhard Streitweiser. He was able to tell me about refugee education and scapegoating narratives on a global lens to be able to apply to my own case study. I also want to use this opportunity to express to you guys 2 points. Use this as an opportunity to not only build your writing skills, but this can end up being a writing sample you give employers. This can be something you submit to contests. Specifically at GW, there's the Eccles First Year Research Excellence Prize that you can put this towards. There's so many ways for you to use this time to make it more than a box to check. Going back to my topic. So what Lebanon decided on was the non-integration policy. So a few reasons for this, but almost every refugee host country had this question to answer post the Nakba, post the expelling of Palestinians to the rest of the region. They had to decide what their stance was going to be, and especially at the onset of the crisis, the overwhelming opinion was non-integration, was preserving their right of return and keeping things almost as is, and making sure that it was very clear that they were a temporary population. The only one who didn't do this, I think, was Jordan. Jordan also happens to have the largest population of Palestinian refugees in the area, but Lebanon followed in suit with the region and opted for non-integration. And another big reason or incentive that they had to do this, what I have to your left is a picture of the Parliament of Lebanon split by all of their ethnic and religious sects. So it's very important for Lebanon how their demographics change, because they have a confessional parliament. So what I mean by that is if 10% of your population is Sunni Muslim, that means 10% of your parliament needs to be Sunni Muslim. Which means that if I'm about to inject your country with a huge refugee population that happens to be majorly Sunni Muslim, the rest of the minorities and the rest of the population is going to get really worried about what their representation is going to look like and whether this changes how much political power they have in parliament. So just to give you a little context about why this was so important to Lebanon in specific, and part of the reason that I decided to focus on Lebanon. So now we're talking about the effects of this legal exclusion. One way that this shows up is that Palestinians in Lebanon cannot be doctors, they cannot be lawyers, they cannot be engineers, they can't be about a few dozen different professions because they're banned from the syndicates that require them that they have to be enrolled in to have these occupations. That's because of something called non-reciprocity, which is a condition tailored to the stateless, which means that if I allow a refugee to be a doctor in my country, I need my own citizens to be able to work abroad in their state. So Lebanon would need Palestine to allow Lebanese nationals to freely work and move between Palestine. However, that's just not possible for a stateless population. They also have not been able to own or inherit property since 2001, and they've had their only public education or healthcare access is through camps, which are of course funded by UNRWA, whose budget has been decreasing. Only 2% hold university degrees, as opposed to 18% of Lebanese nationals. And even when they get a degree, it's unlikely that they're able to apply it to whatever profession they might want to be. And finally, the political part of this is the human impact and the political scapegoating. We've had child labor increases, child marriage increases. All of this tells you a population that's financially desperate. The political scapegoating narrative, which is a big part I discussed, was why this continues to happen. Refugees have been blamed for many different Lebanese crises. This is a historic pattern between the civil war and southern insurgencies who are Palestinian being blamed for like national conflicts that happen as a result, mistaking a part for the whole. Politicians have exaggerated refugee numbers. I told you, and Lebanon censuses will tell you, that it's in the ballpark of 200, 250, but some politicians will allege that it's closer to 500. And this is meant to stoke that flame of fear that they will be outrepresented in parliament. Of course, there's been an issue of repatriation, not just for Palestinians, but also Syrians, because there's unsafe conditions of return. And of course, all this scapegoating unites sectarian divides within the very divided country. Finally, some solutions that I presented in my paper and that you might want to consider as a part of your own is repealing the property law, allowing Palestinians to own and inherit land for greater economic stability, opening professional sectors, and integrating camps into municipal planning. Right now, they're like blurred out on the maps as if they don't exist. And of course, very importantly, the civil society role, shifting these narratives to be less about blame and alienization and more about visibility and integration into the community. That's it. Thank you so much. I'll leave questions to the end.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. As I mentioned before, we're first going to have all the presentations, and then there will be plenty of time for questions and discussions. So the second presentation, Mia, is Mia here? Is not here? Okay. Maybe this will still show up a little bit later. So then we go to Nanaya Wachewa Siribo, roughly? Yeah. For the second presentation here. Let's see. Okay, and while she is putting up the presentation, so she's a sophomore from Accra, Ghana, majoring in political communication with a minor in sociology. She is the social media and PR manager for the African Students Association here on campus, and also serves as a communication engagement assistant for Dakota Hall, combining her interest in communication, culture, and community building. Yes. The floor is yours.
Hi everybody, good evening. I hope you've all had a great day so far. Hopefully you're not still tired from all your classes. But today I'll be presenting on something a little bit more lighthearted, which is Dirty December. So my paper was titled Dirty December and the Divide, Diasporan Dreams versus Ghanaian Realities. So before I begin, I want to ask you all a question. When you think of December, what comes to mind? Like the month December, what do you think of? Christmas. Okay, anybody else? What about like the weather? How's the weather? Like what do you think about like weather-wise? Cold, yeah. Like do you have like a vision of like everything being like warm, like being inside, being indoors, not outside when you think of Christmas? Yeah. Yeah, what did you have to say? Oh, I was just gonna add cozy feeling, yeah. Well, for me, when I think of December, I think of the complete opposite of that. So December for me is all about being outside, going out with my friends, going out with my families, partying all night, partying all morning. Like, I don't think about being inside when I think of December. And that is generally what Dirty December is. So I'm going to define some key terms before I go on with my presentation so that you guys have an idea of what exactly I'm talking about. So Dirty December is a phrase rooted in Ghanaian Pidgin English, which is a language in Ghana, meaning get dirty. So if you noticed, I wasn't saying dirty, I was saying dirty. And that's basically just like letting loose, forgetting about all your issues, like relaxing, specifically in the month of December. So it just urges everybody to be more loose and indulge more and let loose. And the word diasporan is a member of the diaspora, which is a group of people scattered from their original homeland to different countries. So maybe you were originally born in, for example, let me say Mozambique, and you migrate to the United States, and then you have a family and you give birth and your children grow up in the United States. So you would be known as a diasporan, and your child would also be known as a diasporan because you have those like roots. Yeah, so I even forgot to mention this, but the UW I took was Africa and the African diaspora, if you haven't listened to that first. So what even is Dirty December? Where did it come from? And why does it matter so much? So Dirty December originated from Ghana's 2019 Year of Return initiative. So in 2019, the month of December marked the 400th year that the first enslaved African landed in Jamestown, Virginia. So in that period of time, which was December 2019, the current president of Ghana at the time was Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, who urged all diasporans to come back home. So regardless of whether they were from different countries in Africa, he urged them all to come back to Ghana for a month of celebrations. This was a month of cultural celebrations, just to come in, see what it's like to be back in Africa, and generally just enjoy. So over time, this year of return, which was actually subjected to just 2019, evolved into a global and cultural homecoming for the African diaspora. So it didn't just end in 2019. It moved on to 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Everybody was just so eager to come to Ghana in December, because that first year of going back and, you know, partying all day, partying all morning, like being outside as opposed to staying inside when it's cold and being inside, was just so appealing to people. So it kind of brought up this central question of how does Dirty December unite and divide diasporans in Ghana? So how did I pick this research topic? So around the time where we were meant to start like our research projects and start thinking about what we wanted to do, I genuinely just started to miss home. As he mentioned earlier, I'm from Ghana, so my whole day consisted of me just going through my Snap memories, looking at how much fun I was having back home, like calling my family, missing home, and it just consumed my thoughts. That's all I would think about. Okay, 3 more months till I go back to Ghana, 3 more weeks till I go back to Ghana. And I started to think that, you know, my UW is about Africa and the African diaspora. Like, why don't I find a way to just merge this? So I can be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So I can be thinking about Ghana and researching about Ghana, but then also getting my academic work done. So during the class, like when we were learning about Africa and the African diaspora, because I'm from Ghana, I never really thought about what it was like life was like for diasporans. I just thought about what life was like for me, how December was for me, how I enjoyed myself. I didn't think about how people who weren't in the country viewed Ghana. So I was like, let me investigate this. Like, let me figure out what the viewpoint is. Because for me, Dirty December is just partying. But what about for the people who don't live in Ghana? So I knew I wanted to do something genuinely interesting to me and not just a broad topic that I would get bored of, which I also urge you guys to do. Like, I'd say if you're given the chance that the class you're in aligns with something you're genuinely interested in, please pick a topic you feel like you want to know more about. So next is my research goals and my methods. So the first thing I did was actually understand Dirty December. As I mentioned earlier, when I thought about Dirty December, it was just about partying. But then there was a deeper level to that, because there is a historical context behind it. Like what I mentioned earlier, about 400 years since the first enslaved African came to Ghana. So by doing my research and understanding like how it became Dirty December, or the history behind that whole movement, I found out that in the year of return, more than 200,000 people came to visit Ghana, which is an insane amount of people for just a month. And then I found out that after that year of return, more than 500 people wanted to gain citizenship to Ghana, which just urged it to go on and on. And through that research, I found out that there were more than 1,500 businesses opened in Ghana at the time to accommodate for the large amount of people who were coming in during that time. So then I moved on to examine Dirty December, not just as a cultural phenomenon, but also as an economic phenomenon. You know, all these people are coming into this country. What does that mean for Ghana's economy? What does that mean for the people who are living there? What does that mean for the locals who have to maybe switch up what they are selling to accommodate for the large amounts of people coming into Ghana yearly? And then later on, I moved on to comparing diasporan perspectives versus the Ghanaian point of view. So to do this, I used tourism data, I used peer-reviewed sources, as I'm sure your teachers have been hammering on you all, and then I actually used something interesting, which I'll get into later. But the main question I was trying to answer after, of course, exploring what Dirty December is who really benefits from this whole idea of Dirty December? So I'm just going to highlight one of the research methods I used, which was I used Twitter as a research source, or X as a research source. So I just wanted to highlight this research source as a way that you can also explore social media as a means to get information on the topic you are studying about, because in class it's always about peer-reviewed sources and journal entries and articles, but it goes beyond that, especially if you're investigating something that has to do with feeling and emotion and is kind of culturally bound. Because when you think about it, when you think of Twitter, it's just like a rush of emotion. People get in their feelings and tweet out a bunch of stuff, and then it's just on the internet forever. So I was like, let me go into Twitter and see what Ghanaians are saying about Dirty December and see what diasporans are saying about Dirty December, while also linking that to the journal entries I read about and the peer-reviewed sources I looked at. So if you look at the screen right here, on the left side, I have the Ghanaian point of view, like some Ghanaians who were talking about Dirty December. And on the right side, I have like diasporans who were talking about their experiences after coming to Dirty December. So on the right side, you'll see someone has tweeted, Reign Supreme tweeted, seeing only dark-skinned black people on billboards, seeing my only brown foundation and makeup counters. I don't think anything was wrong with me before, but being there was so affirming in a way I'd never experienced. It was really hard to come back to America. Then this lady called Just Call Me Sasha. This was actually an 8-tweet long thread, but I just clipped 2 on here for you guys. Basically, she goes on a tangent talking about how Ghana is basically a heaven for her because she just comes in there, everybody looks like her, everybody treats her the same. She never feels like the outcast in Ghana, which is actually interesting and kind of like wholesome when you look at it from that point of view. However, when I went to look at Ghanaians talking about Dirty December, we have things like, I loathe the way Americans talk about Africa, like it's some kind of Mecca. If you don't know what Mecca is, that's the religious place where Islams go and seek like refuge and pray. And I understand it, but I hate it. It's like you all forget that it's a real place with real problems and there are people suffering there. Then we move on to another person who just talks about how now it's just traffic and overpriced events. So Ghanaians are kind of taking this different outlook where they are looking at how Dirty December has progressed from just like having fun, which was in 2019, the year of return, to diasporans coming back to Ghana and just ruining the cycle of things or the way things are around there, because they come in, they maybe purchase things and tip so much money, because you know in America there's a very big tipping culture. In Ghana we don't have that, so they go and braid their hair or get their hair done for maybe $20, and then they tip $100 because they don't understand why it's so cheap, and that messes with the system. Then my key discoveries was that obviously there was this kind of joy from the diasporan side because they were just excited to feel home and they express it as a transformational experience. However, Ghanaians native to Ghana just talk about how the gains aren't shared equally and the only people who truly benefit from Dirty December are really the business owners at the top of the chain, and they just talk about how a lot of the labor is informal and how locals face price hikes after these diasporans leave the country. So we kind of look at how it moves from being this cultural phenomenon to this deeper like economic issue that's happening in Ghana, where we can't balance whether it's actually benefiting the economy or destroying the economy. And I actually had a video to play for you guys, which is kind of like a trailer to my essay, kind of like expresses everything I've just said right now. So I'll just play that for you guys.
And I've been to Ghana in December of 2020. I loved it because I live in Pennsylvania and it's cold, so it's nice to go somewhere warmer.
It was really easy at first, but then like I'll say as the years went by, I started getting like
The social life, like partying, and then also like being able to speak much instead of like
kind of like irritable type people, like it got too congested.
people leave the diasporas, you know, immerse themselves in good people who are like watch people who are like successful lives in this economy.
So I would say in this conversation because like the aspirants just keep hearing which may be cheap to you, but it's still expensive to us. They cause congestion, they also cause prices to rise. This will be a good competition.
How do you describe the vibe and other types of
Prices change. It's actually scary how the inflation just grew and comes down like during the December period. It's just extra stress during that period.
Okay, so that's basically what my research project was in a nutshell. That was actually my remediation assignment where I turned my paper into a trailer for a movie to kind of make people understand what the whole purpose was. But at the end of the day, my key discoveries were, can two things exist at once? And that was yes. The same festival that boosts the economy also overwhelms infrastructure, which reveals how cultural celebration can mask as inequality. What is the relevance and implications of my whole research project? So it just highlights global tensions between culture and capitalism, essentially questioning where do we draw the line between all of this. It urges inclusive tourism policies and local participation in order to make sure that there's no tension between local Ghanaians and Ghanaians in the diaspora. And it urges to promote inclusive and well thought out dialogue between Ghana and its diaspora, urging diasporans not to talk about Ghana as it's some sort of mecca and come in and kind of ruin, quote unquote, ruin things for the locals and leave, rather than making it seem like, oh, they came in for a time, experienced what they needed to experience and left. And then lastly, the importance of cultural equity and sustainable development, and how we actually need to acknowledge that two things can exist at once. The economy can be booming and deteriorating at the same time. Yes. So, thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think the third person is on the way, but I'm not here yet. So we're just gonna start with our Q&A right now. And I already see someone over there who would like to ask a question. So please go ahead.
I have two questions. The first one is probably just like, do you think like the meaning of the day something is lost? Like as the tourists come in and they just I just wanted to know, that was my first question.
Yes, I actually do think that the meaning is beginning to get lost. You know, it started off as this cultural celebration, people coming in not just to party, but then they visit like the cultural sites in Ghana, they'd go around, they'd learn things about actual Ghanaian history, but then over time, also because of like the media, it's been publicized to just be this party town where people just come in, spend a bunch of money and leave. But I believe that it can actually gain its like relevance and meaning back through all the points that I discussed in my last slide.
Also, I was going to say what do you feel like is the difference between when you go to Ghana and like how they treat you there and how they treat you here?
Oh, that's actually a very interesting question. So obviously, growing up in Ghana, I want to say that I never really experienced any form of like microaggressions or any form of racism, mostly because you grow up in a space where everybody looks like you, everybody understands like maybe the comments that you make or the remarks that you make, everybody is, you're growing up in a culture that you're used to. Whereas when you come in here, it's a completely different like way of doing things that you've learned from when you were younger. You come in here and it's completely different. So yes, I would say that coming here and experiencing life here is very different from experiencing life in Ghana, because you move from being part of, if I can say, like the majority to being a minority, which is a drastic change.
I asked this because like I grew up here, and like when I went to Thailand with my family, there was this man that like asked to take a picture of us, and like I mean like my mom was like, no, like we don't want you to do that and all that stuff. So I was just curious as to like what the difference was for something that lives with those in the majority.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Very good questions. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm also planning on doing mine for the Middle East, and I'm having a really hard time like getting solid numbers and cross-referencing different governments saying opposite things, and so I was wondering like how you manage to authenticate everything and like get solid data.
A very simple example is like for that population figure, I swear there's almost 10 numbers, and like it's not even like they're close. There's 10 numbers. So I would say it depends the extent of the assignment, but I would just say be very transparent about like every time you say a number, it is not expected that you can always have this like omniscient knowledge of who's lying and who's not, but you do your due diligence, and then you say the number, you say who it's by, and then you do like if you ever did like an OPVL, like a very short like this is like why this person is credible, this might be like their perspective. And that's really the best you can do. Your due diligence, and then when you actually mention it, be like, this is why you should trust this number, this is why maybe you shouldn't. But yeah, I definitely understand the struggle. It's also, like, I'm sure there are many experts of professors that you can talk to just to like get that context of what perspectives certain governments might be coming from, that it might be nice to have conversations like that with professors and get that insight. But in general, do your best and just lay it all out for the reader to understand.
Yes, over here.
I had a question can you remind me your name?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, Nanaya.
Okay, I had a question about if when you went into your research, do you like have any biases going into your research about the December that once you like began researching you had to kind of like let go of? Because I feel like a lot of the times like people, including myself, like I always like have a certain like way that I want to go about my research, but like when I'm doing like actual research, like I end up like getting confused because there's so many different perspectives. So I was just curious, like how did you manage like to control like your biases when you went into your research?
That's a very good question. I actually wrote my paper 2 times because of that. The first time I wrote it, it's very easy, especially when you're writing something, when you're writing on a topic that you're passionate about or you like, it's very easy to write the essay with the outcome that you want in your mind already. So you start writing the essay and you already know the conclusion. And that's how my first essay went about. I was like, okay, yeah, I know how this is going to go, wrote it. And then I realized that I was letting my biases come because I wasn't acknowledging how people in the diaspora would feel. I was just explaining it from my point of view only. So that's when I decided to actually go to Twitter and look at it from a personal level and not just from academic writing. So looking at it from other perspective, I was able to push myself like away from what I thought the conclusion would be and actually explore the topic at hand. So looking at it intensively from both sides. And another thing is, I feel like when you're writing about something you think you know, you don't research the parts that you know, which is also another bias that I had during this, because I figured that, I'm Ghanaian, so I know how Ghanaians feel, which wasn't accurate. So I actually went back to look at it from locals' perspectives again before looking at diasporans' points of view. So I would just say completely remove yourself from the equation. If it's a topic that you are passionate about or you know about, act like you know nothing about it. Like, don't use your own knowledge where it isn't relevant. Do the necessary research, even if you think you know what the outcome of that research would be.
So I have a question about the sources for the Denny December research. So how did you process the emotional and subjective information, such as the Twitter posts, and present it as something concrete, quantitative, and straightforward for the readers to understand?
Okay, so looking at the tweets that I did, so I actually got my tweets from not just searching up Dirty December on Twitter, but there's an Instagram page called Ghana Twitter. So when a tweet reaches a number of retweets and likes, when it essentially goes viral, the Ghana Twitter page screenshots the tweet and reposts that on a different platform. So they kind of like verify who it's coming from. Like, this is a page that does all of the verification needed. They verify who it's coming from. They make sure it's not a bot on Twitter. Sometimes they even like contact the people who are tweeting this to make sure that the people are real and ensure that they aren't posting content that are like AI generated or from robots. So what I did is I picked all those tweets from that page that already verified those tweets. Now, the hardest part about using Twitter or like tweets as a form of like evidence was finding a way to reference this or like put it in your sources, because you have to put the time, the dates, and the person's full name. And sometimes people on Twitter are under like aliases, they don't use their real name. So for the ones that I felt like I need to investigate this more, I would DM the people and say, hey, I'm writing this project, I'd like to use your tweets. Can I use your tweets in this? And they'd give me that permission and I'd go on to use it. Yeah.
I think there's a question right there. Yeah.
For the first presentation, so my senior year of high school, I took a modern global issues class, and I learned about like Syrian refugees in Lebanon. So I'm just wondering if they have like different experiences, like are they treated differently?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Syrian refugees like vastly outnumber Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, of course. I would highly recommend I keep like talking to your professors, but like it's just like a really great way to get information, I think. Anyways, the professor that taught my UW, Dr. Nabila Hijazi, Hijazi, most of the class is taught about the experience of Syrian refugees. So that would probably be a great resource she'll point you at a million different like sources of information that you could get. There's some great documentaries also specifically about like the Syrian refugee experience. But yeah, I would say the biggest difference is that Syrian refugees vastly outnumber Palestinian refugees, and also the idea of like, of course, they're not stateless, and so the ideas about the right of return were unique to Palestinian refugees, and also ideas of reciprocity. So the thing about work, like being able to work and being able to be admitted into the syndicate, like the labor syndicates of Lebanon, Syrians had no problem with that because reciprocity did exist between Lebanon and Syria. So yeah, I would say it's like it's a more like established, and they have less of a unique refugee identity because they were like their temporary status was more upheld and legitimate. Now the conversation is about what like safe repatriation looks like. But yeah, I would say very different timelines, different population sizes, different legal contexts, and yeah, reach out to Dr. Hijazi if you have time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you think that if maybe the older generation would have thought about Day December differently than you immediately as you were going through this research?
What do you mean by the older
You
generation?
said like how you had, you already thought you knew how everybody felt about it, but like I mean like as like an older generation, they would have like maybe thought of like economic struggle and all of those things. So I was just curious like, whether they would have just immediately thought of it differently than you.
Oh, I think 100% they would have thought of it a lot differently, because for me, like, as I mentioned, like I'm very interested in, when I go back home, I'm interested in like going out and things. But when looking at like the older generation who maybe they prioritize going about their business, maybe going to work and coming back, and then now having to factor in that in the month of December, so many people are in the country that you may have to leave for work 2 hours before the time happens, you know, things like that. Certain outlooks that parts of their daily lives that are disrupted because of that. I think that's the first thing that would come to the older generation's mind, not just, for example, going to a club and it being crowded, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then we'll go over here.
Clara, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if there is a nation that you think has done a particularly effective or good job with either refugees in general or Palestinian refugees. Then I have a second question. I'm curious about what it's like to interview an expert and what did that give your project that it wouldn't have had otherwise.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so for the first part, I think if I tailor it to Palestinian refugees, a certain outlier at least is that, so in Arab League discussions, the entire Arab League almost unanimously opted for non-integration. So keeping their status as temporary, not trying to allow them to have roots or economic stability. The only exception to that rule is Jordan. Jordan, like, I forgot the percent, but like, their integration with Palestinian refugees has become so immersed that Palestinians are now, like, Palestinians and their descendants are now a significant percentage of the Jordanian population. So at the very least, it's an outlier. And I would say it's probably been a more accurate treatment of Palestinians now that it's been 75 years. Makes a little bit more sense to integrate them into the legal system and into work and everything that a population needs to thrive. Globally, as far as the most significant refugee populations, we talked about like Syrian refugees in Germany, for example. That was also something, to tie it into your second question, that was also something that Dr. Streitweiser spoke with me about. So to transition this, I would say Germany has done a pretty good job. For this UW, I think we compared the United States, Canada, and Germany. For some reasons that I can't amazingly articulate, Germany has been the star student. And some perspectives that Dr. Streitweiser gave me. He gave me a very global perspective, as well as a conversation about like the political conversations around refugees. Specifically, we discussed like student movements in Germany that had worked to elicit like different political achievements towards like the habilitation and like the integration of refugees. So I would say it's, when you're researching, you only know so many questions to ask. I think talking to someone with experience and like a foundation in the field gives you these questions that you didn't even know to ask. I wasn't thinking about student movements. I wasn't thinking about Germany that much. Like I wasn't thinking about these other lenses that just wouldn't have come up in my research. Yeah, so I would say it's good for opening up your mind. And then my picks would be Jordan for Palestinians, Germany overall.
I think I saw a question over here.
So for the second presentation, do you think like this exposure to like the government or I guess people with higher try to like boost through I guess romanticize coming to Ghana like for diasporas just to like gain money or gain economic status in Ghana?
I think that's a really good question. And yeah, I do think that some business owners do that. I talk about it a bit more in my essay about how, because of how many people are coming into Ghana and how many things are being purchased, there's this narrative that the economy is just being boosted. But then when you actually look into the numbers, it's only the top 10% of Ghanaian business owners making money, because there is capped at that. So they kind of romanticize, oh yeah, come to Ghana, come and buy these expensive dresses. These are what the locals are doing, when in reality, these are just not actually what the locals are doing, just to benefit themselves. So there is that little level of corruption when looking at Dirty December from that lens. And I actually talk about combating that later on in my essay. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear.
Sorry.
You're good.
I'm also doing Lebanon for
Yeah.
but still, I don't know, to ask, would you focus specifically on the economic
Yeah. I would say thinking about the length of, like the scope or the length of the given assignment or paper, I think this was supposed to be like a 15-page paper. So I just did have a lot of scope to be able to at least like dip a little bit into all of those sections. I would say if you have a smaller scope, or quite frankly, it is overwhelming. So if you're overwhelmed or if you have a smaller scope, I would say that from the onset, like build that into your research question. Like for example, I would say that I think I focused a little bit disproportionately on like the political narrative, because I thought like political scapegoating was such like a common narrative that I was quite interested in it, and like what different officials would say, and like the history of scapegoating and the Civil War and like the Southern insurgencies, whatever. I chose political a little bit more than economic and social, but I would say be very mindful of the scope of your assignment and go from there to tailor your research question to the scope you have and the patience you have in going through the sources.
Okay, so I think our first speaker just walked in. Had some unfortunate events with traffic to come here. So, so if you don't mind, I mean, it's a very good conversation and there's lots more questions, but I'd like to maybe give you an opportunity to also give your presentation. Probably won't really have that much time after that anymore for questions, but I do want to give you the opportunity to present your research project as well. And so, you can, while you're setting up, did you already upload? Yeah, to there? Okay, so let's then see if we can set you up. But let's then, first of all, thank these first two presenters for their great presentations and answering all your questions. And so you can either stay here or sit in the audience. Okay. And then we'll go to the third presentation here. So let's go out of this one. Yeah. Okay. So, Mia Quezada is a proud New Yorker. Her second year at the GW School of Business, majoring in general business with a concentration in sport and event management. And the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. Yes. So I, again, a general business major with concentration in sports, event, and tourism hospitality. So I took UW 1020 Law as a force for social change with Professor Zachary Wolf. And my paper was surrounded on the tourism growth trap, the erosion of the human right under capitalism. So my research focus kind of answered the question of how capitalism reshapes tourism into a profit-driven industry, eroding access to the human right to travel. Some questions and motivations that guided this research focus was, how has tourism shifted from cultural exploration to capitalist exploitation? So kind of noticing how it became a bit, what was once cultural connection, it kind of became an engine for inequality and commodification. And then why does this matter for social equity and sustainability? And then what forces were enabling this transition? So kind of diving into the process of choosing this focus, I was already enrolled in 2 other tourism hospitality management classes. So I was kind of already in the process of researching about tourism, but more on a managerial focus. But then I decided that it would be smart of me to kind of use this research and input it into my paper, kind of just navigating different ideas within tourism. So since tourism is known and mentioned a lot, I figured it would be a good way to, again, dive into other ideas, dive into other focuses, and look for specific research. But I struggled to do that, which is why my paper kind of also helped kind of in-depth find different ideas. And then what forces were enabling this transition? Falling into the framework. So capitalism drives infinite growth at any cost. I kind of looked at tourism through the lens of capitalism, specifically neoliberal capitalism, which prioritize economic growth, privatization, and deregulation. I found this through my research. And then second framework would be tourism as a tool to stabilize neoliberal economies. So this perspective just overall helped me see how governments and corporations sort of reshape tourism again into a tool for profit. So into deeper focus, you can see how tourism actually stabilizes different capitalist economies by turning culture again into culture and travel into basic products, and then the human right to travel becoming a market privilege. So within examining tourism as a human right, you can see the restrictions, you can see kind of the right to travel and explore being taken away from certain groups of people. And then within tourism becoming a profit-driven industry, the right gets restricted and it influences how tourism operates. Going into some methods and sources, I used a comparative case study approach to tourism capitalist effects. So overall going into academic articles, policy reports, economic data, focusing on over-tourism, labor, deregulation, inequality. For example, some scholarly work I looked at was Robert Fletcher's kind of tourism and neoliberalism theoretical lens to focus my research within, again, labor, deregulation, inequality. I also used different case studies, like Venice showed over-tourism and cultural commodification. Barcelona showed, again, different commodifications within a city. South Bronx showing gentrification linked to short-term rentals. And then Palau offered a counterexample which showed how strict regulation can protect tourism integrity. And then again, different scholars and data just show different lenses in which you can see the overall research. My first key discovery was, again, the commodification of travel, destinations being reshaped for profit, authenticity being replaced by marketable experiences. Within my case study, I used Venice and its over-tourism, kind of showing how global retail chains were replacing local artisans, explaining how travel became a product rather than an experience. Second key discovery was inequality and labor exploitation. So I kind of focused on travel being becoming a privilege, and it's the idea of it becoming a right being taken away. Within low-wage labor, upholding luxury tourism, and then tourism's dirty secret, which was researched by, again, another scholar, Sarosi. She kind of dives into systemic exploitation faced by housekeepers in the global tourism industry, and then using other case studies like Canada, the Dominican Republic, Thailand, overall just using those articles to highlight common issues. And then 3, deregulation and marginalization. Within Airbnb and real estate gentrification, corporate capture of public resources, again, I use a South Bronx case study to focus on tourist-centered gentrification. And then finally, loopholes in corporate power. I wanted to incorporate this idea into my paper just because it showed what forces were driving this change within tourism. So tax evasion, maybe some labor loopholes, profit without accountability was a big idea for many scholars. So focusing on corporations exploiting legal gaps to avoid taxes, to avoid responsibility, and kind of how this further pushed the change within the tourism industry from something being exploration and kind of within a human right, that right being taken away and becoming a just overall corporate industry. And then focusing on solutions and reforms, I focused on enforcing regulation and closing loopholes, adopting regenerative tourism, and reframing travel as a public good and not a commodity. So focusing on restoring the right to travel and addressing the deep inequalities embedded into the tourism industry, which requires bold, intentional reforms, kind of advocating for the government to do some kind of change within this industry. And then some basic reflections after my paper. Tourism, well, I very much saw the focus in tourism becoming a mirror of inequality. So just overall, you never notice. It is a big industry that's very explorative and adventurous, and kind of you focus within the moment when visiting any kind of country, but then again you see the different systems embedded in which mirrors inequality. Within my research, it taught me different ways to reveal corrupt systems, and then overall, travel should connect and not divide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, almost 5. We have time for like 1 or 2 maybe quick questions for me. Anyone have a question? So let me then ask, so what are your thoughts now about your next vacation?
I mean, you do definitely realize more on like local shopping, finding those different retail stores that aren't corporate based, and kind of just finding different ways to adopt regenerative tourism within any country. So leaving the destination better than how you found it, and looking at their ecosystems, different ways to revitalize it. Those are different viewpoints that you can incorporate whenever traveling. But yeah, it was very, very much emphasized after writing this paper.
Very good. So let's thank all 3 presenters. Thank you all for all the great questions, and have a wonderful weekend.
The second machine is up there for anyone who